Hello, Emily. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to being here for a long time, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share my work with your community in the San Juan Islands.
I'd like to just ask you a few questions about your journey in coming to this body of work that you created. Behind us, we have this magnificent piece called River of Their Passing. Tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind this piece and how you made it.
The title of the piece, River of Their Passing, is actually taken from an essay by writer Nick Jans, who spent a lot of time in the Arctic. And in this essay, he describes being out hunting he was out doing something on the tundra, and he starts to feel the ground shaking. And he realizes shortly that the caribou migration is heading his way, and we're talking, millions of animals, and there's nowhere for him to go to avoid this river of caribou that are stampeding across the tundra. So he basically just has to kind of hunker down into a little ball, and he describes the animals just coming and kind of parting around him and then continuing on, and he was just kind of immersed in the bodies and the flesh of the caribou. And I'd been thinking a lot about these large migrational energies for a while anyways. The piece that I did before this piece, Feather Woman Wailing, is a giant wall of wailing snow geese and on their migration, which was kind of the migrational energy of the air, and then the caribou is the land, and then we have the salmon, which kind of completes that as the water or the sea energy. And I made the Feather Woman Wailing and this piece very shortly after my father passed away, which was the last of my immediate family. I lost my twin brother when we were 24, and my mom a number of years after that. And when my father passed, it really kind of felt like I had to find new ways to kind of integrate myself into the river of life. I had also read this beautiful passage about the Yupik people in Alaska talking about the salmon migration and their relationship to the salmon. And they spoke about how when the salmon swim up the river and die, they don't leave their carcass on the side of the river or the lake, but they leave their canoe, which I thought was this really beautiful idea of the body as a boat. And when the salmon do this, then the spirits are free to travel overland back to the sea, where they will then start the cycle all over again. And I thought this was really beautiful, and I had this image of the caribou kind of picking up the salmon spirits and assisting them on their journey back to the sea, so that you had this living, dense flesh of the caribou kind of commingling with this very subtle, fine energy of the salmon spirits, all in one river simultaneously. And it's going to continue on and on infinitely, and nothing will be left behind or excluded from that. So the one is in the many is in the one.
It's beautiful. I love how you have explained this, because I think it helps our visitors to the museum, when they're looking at a piece, to not just see something on the wall, see the color, the shape, the form, but what is the story behind it. So I think you've really helped us with that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. This piece actually went through many different versions. It was originally like the goose piece, kind of on panels, but towards the end, the bodies of the caribou kind of floated off the panels, and just that was all that was left, was their shapes or forms. But these are just giant sheets of watercolor paper and like a Liquitex acrylic inks. I use the transparent and Sumi ink for the black. And I have a large studio with concrete floors, so I can make big messes. I don't know how many sheets of watercolor paper over the course of this, but I can do just giant ink washes for the large blur effect. And then for the more intricate areas, those are kind of left in puddles to evaporate over days or weeks. And as they shrink, you kind of get the detail. And then I can kind of find the forms I want within the washes and search for them and piece things together little by little that way.
the title of your show is called All is a Circle Within Me. Can you speak to us about how you came about that title and the meaning for it?
Yeah, of course. This one came to me from a poem that I stumbled across by Nancy Wood. And the title of the poem is called The Circle. And the opening line of the poem, and also the refrain of the poem, is all is a circle within me. The essence of the poem is really about making a peaceful home for all of experience and all of existence, and reconciling the dualities of our experience as human beings. So life and death, having this very finite, particular, embodied experience of being in the here and now, and then also somehow trying to grasp the infinitude of everything else and the eternal nature of things, like even beyond geological time. Just how do you hold infinity basically inside oneself? And this poem really resonated with me because that was my big question going into this body of work. My work usually starts with a question or an inquiry of some kind, and I'm trying to arrive at, if not an answer, then maybe a different question. But my question was, how do I make a home, and a peaceful and whole home inside myself that feels, especially after losing my family, that feels connected, that feels coherent, that feels harmonious. With the caribou and the salmon, we have kind of this endless cycle of, through time, of the life and the death recirculating, and also the space, the materiality of the coarse flesh of the caribou and the fine spiritual flesh of the salmon. So we have a space and time. And then on the other side of the gallery, the form kind of dissolves. For a while, had this feeling like I just wanted to draw straight lines and make circles, and I still can't quite explain it, but I think there was a desire to kind of empty myself of my own story and my own narrative and my own internal congestion. And there's something about working with the geometry and the patterns and just these tapestries of color that for me was very contemplative and ritualistic and ceremonial in some way. So there's a piece for every direction, northeast, or the cardinal directions, northeast, southwest, and their corresponding seasons, winter, spring, summer, fall. And then there's above and below, which would be the vertical axis.
Can you tell us a little bit about the process of making them, as well as why you chose the colors that you did?
Yeah, thank you for the question, because that process is very different from the caribou. There's about 12 coats of gesso on the piece, so maybe 3/4 to a gallon of gesso per piece.
Oh my gosh.
And so it gesso each side 6 times, and then everything is hand wet sanded by hand with sanding sponges, so that gives you this very kind of burnished surface. And then I kind of just wove it's all pastel, it's not paint. The only paint is, you'll see in certain light, you can see some shimmery parts on just the knots, and that's an interference acrylic paint. But it's mostly all pastel and colored pencil. And I can apply the pastel with solvents and brush it out and spray fixative and then sand out and apply a different color or apply a layer over. So it was really kind of this process of weaving the layers together, but also subtractively, unweaving and then weaving and unweaving and then weaving again. And the colors, a lot of people ask me about the colors. It was really just going from kind of just a personal associations from childhood about just different seasons and their color palettes. And then above and below was a little bit more from imagination. What might that look like? And to be honest, with the above, I didn't know for a really, really long time. That piece went through so many different versions until I eventually painted white over the whole thing and started over in the last couple of weeks.
I think many artists can relate to that.
Not the first one.
Yeah. But I'm also so glad that you did go for it again and what you came up with, and that it is very different than the other ones. But again, it almost feels when you look at it like it could be even the start of another series. Yeah.
And each piece is structured around a Celtic infinity knot, which is a design, kind of a looped pattern that has no beginning and no end.
Mm-hmm.
Shortly after Ross, my twin, passed away, I dreamt about him and still do almost every night, but there was one particular dream where it didn't feel like I was dreaming about him, but I was dreaming with him. And I knew I was dreaming, and he knew I was dreaming, and I knew he was dead, and he knew he was dead, and we knew we had this very short amount of time to communicate. And the only thing I really wanted to do was just hold him, so I just ran to him, and I just pulled him to me. And I could feel that he was starting to fade away, so I kind of was like, oh, I gotta ask him something. And so I pushed him away, and I was like, okay, so just tell me, like, what happens? You know, where are you? And he smiled, and he started making these figure eights in the air. And I like words. I'm a word person. I like clear communication. I was frustrated. I said, Ross, please, tell me. I don't understand what you're saying. And he said, Emily, just this. And then he was gone, and I woke up and I called my friend in tears. I was like, he was right there, and I had him. He didn't answer my question. And my friend started laughing. He said, Emily, he was giving you the sign for infinity. He's telling you it just continues. And I don't think we can know exactly what that means, but for me that felt like all the evidence that I needed, that there is something bigger and more total and comprehensive than especially I could grasp at 24. So yeah, I chose to use the infinity knots as kind of the one kind of structure for those pieces.
What would you like the viewer to take away from seeing your work here?
Peace and awe. Awe for the mystery of the infinite and all of its incomprehensibility, and knowing that we are here and living at this intersection of the very particular and the very personal, and the universal and the infinite, which is outside of our comprehension. And I think also, I really hope that people feel like the work belongs to them in some way, that they're invited to stand in front of it and experience it in a way that that they can become absorbed in the imagery and feel like there's space for their experience in a way where they can merge with the work and the work can merge with them, and there's kind of a mutual belonging, so that it's not, it's not my caribou, the artist, because I created them, or my blessings, but to me it's the caribou and the blessings, and they are now part of, the flesh of the world, and they're for everyone, and they belong to all of us.
Well, thank you, Emily. We look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah, thank you. It's a privilege and an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.